is meeting with Indigenous people in the community of Maskwacis. It's the home of the former Ermineskin Residential School. That was one of the largest residential schools in Canada. We're just taking on. Sure. Just having a look there at the powwow lands where this will be taking place. Let's bring in our Vinesh Pratap, who is in Maskwacis. And Vinesh, what is the scene there right now? What can you tell us?
Well, good morning from this community. We are just south of Edmonton. Maskwacis is a community that comprises 4 First Nations, and they are a very proud people here. And so this is a very significant site for the Pope to be visiting here today. As we get ready for the program to start, just before we came on, we were hearing from residential school survivors. One individual saying it's hard to accept an apology, while at the same time saying accepting of an apology will let him let go of his pain. One phrase that really stood out for me is that, as part of this reconciliation process, and we're dealing with the trauma of residential schools, he says, we are human beings. And so, yes, a lot of people here, not only from Maskwacis and Alberta, but from BC, other parts of Canada, here to witness the Pope issue an apology, words here on Canadian soil. There was a delegation that went to Rome earlier this year, and there was the apology from the Pope then, but they're seeking more of that full apology here. So again, the ceremony starts, right about now, and the Pope is visiting the former residential school site in about 10 minutes. It ran from 1895 to 1975, so think about it, a number of decades, thousands of kids over the course of those decades. While this is a historic visit and very significant, it is also quite condensed and short. The Pope will be leaving this community by about 11:15 Mountain Time this morning. So short, but again, significant, and people waiting to hear what those words are from the Pope.
Yeah, no doubt. A lot of people wanting to hear from him. What is the sense that you're getting from people there today? Are they hopeful? Are they sad, pensive?
You know what? This is such a complicated issue. Some people you speak with, they are just glad that this is happening. Others, they want to see more. The Pope and his apology is just one step in a multi-step process. Keep in mind, this has been something that's been underway since the 1980s, when the issue of the impact of residential schools first came to light by advocates within the community. It became a part of, slowly, the national conversation, and then things really came into the spotlight after the discovery of hundreds of unmarked graves at the former Kamloops Residential School last year, and that really caught the attention of the world community, and I think the Canadians and the Catholic Church as a whole. And so people are looking, to ensure that what happened in the past is acknowledged, is taught for future generations. And of course, they want to hear some sincerity from the Pope and to see that sincerity from the Catholic Church overall when it comes to the impact of residential schools.
No doubt. Vinesh, can you tell us a little bit about the logistics of this? How many people are expected there today? Is security tight? How are they handling it? Because there is a lot of people, and as you mentioned, there is an international scope on this as well.
Yeah, we should mention security is absolutely tight. We came here quite early this morning. There were multiple security checkpoints. We came in one way, we went to another, and they were like, no, you have to kind of turn back. And so not only security for the Pope, the Prime Minister, he showed up a short while ago. The PM, he will be here along with some ministers as well. So you got the security for the Pope, you got the security for the Prime Minister, heavy RCMP presence. We actually spoke to a couple of RCMP members who were brought in from Victoria that are just taking part in all the operations here. So there's that aspect as well. The entourage is quite significant, along with that international media presence. When the media was let in, they just walked past probably about a half an hour, 45 minutes ago, and just so many different faces from all over the world here. So this is being watched by the world. And again, it goes back to when that discovery was made. of those graves, those unmarked graves in Kamloops, it really caught not just Canadians' attention, but the world attention as well.
At present, can you tell us the Pope, what was he doing right now earlier this morning?
So the Pope arrived here in Maskwacis just a short time ago, and one of his first stops here in this community was a visit to the Ermineskin Nation Cemetery. And it's a very short stop there. He arrived in his Fiat that some people might have seen already, that escorted him from the Edmonton International Airport into the city. And then with that visit, from there he goes to the residential school site, and then he'll be brought here to the site behind me, where he will address the crowd. And again, many people are hoping that he will issue his apology. But again, things are quite fluid. It'll be interesting to see what the Pope says, how it's interpreted by people here. And then after that, things wrap up at about 11:45. Just let me confirm that. No, sorry, 11:15 Mountain Time. The Pope will leave the site here, head back into Edmonton, and then he'll take part in another event, an invitation-only event at an Indigenous run or an Indigenous Catholic church in the city.
How will the Pope engage with the people? Tomorrow there is that massive mass taking place at Commonwealth. Can you tell us a little bit about all of that?
Yeah, that is a fairly significant event. It will be an open-air mass. The tickets, they were provided for free, and thousands of people, up to 65,000 people, in fact, are expected to take part. People from across Western Canada, most likely attending that mass. But again, I think for the Indigenous community, first and foremost, it's what the Pope will say here today that they are anticipating the most, because this particular event is on their soil. You know, it is in their home community, and what the Pope says here will be significant. Yes, there is the open air mass tomorrow, followed by the pilgrimage to what's called Lac Sainte Anne, which is just located west of the city of Edmonton. A very important faithful exercise for those who take part. But again, I think for people who are looking for that apology, what is said here today in Maskwacis, again, is what they'll be paying close attention to.
Absolutely. Such a meaningful day. Hopefully it goes very well for everyone. Thank you so much for your time. That's Vinesh Pratap joining us from Maskwacis. Thank you. And we will continue our coverage of the Pope's visit as he gets set to speak in Alberta. First, a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are continuing our coverage of the Pope's visit to Canada. He is at present in Alberta at Maskwacis, where he has been touring the Ermineskin Cree First Nation Cemetery this morning. And as you can see, we have some live coverage of Mr. Singh there, Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, of course, along with other dignitaries and officials from First Nations communities that are taking part in today's special event. At present, they are at the Bear Park powwow. They're entering the powwow circle, where we are expecting to see the Pope potentially issuing an apology. And there he is, of course, Pope Francis, making his way into the powwow area at Maskwacis. We are following coverage of Pope Francis in Canada. He has now arrived at Maskwacis in Alberta, where he is expected to speak. Very solemn moment as he considers and takes in everything that would have taken place on these lands many years ago. Memories that are very fresh for the people who live there. Pope now appearing to be departing what is the cemetery that he just paid homage at, and making his way through the community. And as you can see there, he's leaving the Ermineskin Cemetery on the Ermineskin Cree First Nation. Very solemn moment, of course, as he is escorted. He will be making his way past the residential school there, the Ermineskin Residential School. That was established by Roman Catholic missionaries just west of what was then the community of Hobbema in 1894. It was a boarding school at the time. And back in 1894, that was a decade before Alberta became a province. The Pope, of course, not in perfect health. Since his arrival in Canada, he has been making use of a wheelchair in order to get around safely. Yesterday, he spent much of the day after his arrival in Edmonton, Alberta, to rest for the next few days in Canada. Very busy time. Today, of course, he gets his official start underway.
You're standing over your worship. Other first days.
Thank you, Chief. Chief has been home.
Arrest me. That's of course.
Thank you, Chief. Hope you have the holy welcome to our territory. Chief Vernon Saddleback, Samson Cree Nation.
Su santidad, bienvenido a nuestro territorio.
My honor.
Todo honor.
Thank you, Chief. Your Holiness,
I'm Chief Randy Ermineskin.
Su santidad, bienvenido a Ermineskin. Este es mi precinto.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you so much. So proud for you. Definitely proud.
The Pope has been spending time meeting with First Nations leaders. Yesterday, he met several chiefs when he arrived, as well as survivors from residential schools. And as we just saw now, he was welcomed by several Indigenous chiefs, and he offered them a gift. The weather today in Maskwacis has been a little bit varied, from rain to sun and now apparently wind. The Pope taking a moment to take the site in. Delegation in procession with Pope Francis there, making their way towards eventually Bear Park powwow grounds, where we will be hearing from the Pope. He just left the Ermineskin Cree First Nation Cemetery a few moments ago. He's taking in the Ermineskin Residential School. As we said, it was one of the largest residential schools in Canada. Thousands of children went through there. Ill health, overcrowding was a problem at the school in the early years. In 1903, 3 children died of tuberculosis. A government survey in the 1920s concluded that 50% of the students at the school were infected with the disease. Eventually, the federal government did assume responsibility for the facility in 1969, and it was closed in the early 1970s. Eventually, the educational facilities were transferred to the Ermineskin Band in 1979. And as Pope Francis and the delegation makes their way towards the powwow grounds, we'll bring in one of our guests for this morning, Dr. Tricia Logan, an assistant professor at the University of British Columbia. Thank you so much for joining us again. It's nice to see you. So you've had a day to digest the Pope's arrival in Canada. You spent that time with us yesterday. He's calling it a penitential pilgrimage. Are those words meaningful or powerful, especially given what's supposed to unfold today?
Penance, yeah, very meaningful. And I know for a lot of survivors, for a lot of their families, that is quite significant that there's kind of, there'll be these phases of his trip that he'll have a time for apology and a time for really reflection and prayer, and then moving on to kind of think more about reconciliation, think about the future. Narrative into his trip or has been organized. And so it has, of course, all kinds of different meanings for different people. But that theme of penance and that theme of that to remind the world who's watching that this is not necessarily a celebration, but what the purpose and the significance is of the trip.
Do you think having the Pope, especially for this nation where he's at in Maskwacis, do you think it's a painful experience, a reminder of what the church, how it portrayed and carried itself there? Or is it an opportunity for them to welcome him? Because obviously they have welcomed him to their grounds, their territory.
Of course, there will be undoubtedly a mixture of feelings today and over the next few days. And then for days or weeks to come, for months to come, for people who have, for survivors, especially for intergenerational survivors, their families, to kind of relive or to think about or to have trauma resurface or to reflect on this, on the apology, on the visit, on the gatherings of just having gatherings of the opportunity to have survivors come together is very powerful, is positive in a lot of ways. And of course, healing is such an individual and such a distinct experience for every person. So it's hard to say what that range looks like, but it is a very significant time, and it is a very, for some traumatic, for some, it's a day a lot of people have waited for a long time and have advocated for a really long time.
I can hear the emotion even in your voice. For you, what does this whole visit, this trip mean?
For me, I've it's been part of my. I've been very fortunate to work with survivors of residential school and the histories of residential school for over 20 years, and it's a history of the schools that has touched my own family and family members that attended residential school. And it is a very historic moment, and it is. I'm thinking of those survivors that came before, from the time that children left the schools, for as long as the schools were open, from the mid-1950s, 1960s, when survivors were writing their memoirs, they were writing poetry, they were creating art, visual art, songs, films, and then through those times, through the 1980s and 1990s of kind of greater kind of public knowledge was growing, and survivors were coming forward towards the settlement agreement and towards the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That's decades, almost a century of sharing stories, sharing truths, and asking for the Catholic Church and asking for the Pope to really hear those stories and really genuinely address those stories. So it's a long history with the Church, and it's a long history of thinking of what that could mean.
Absolutely. We're just have our live coverage here, and we can see that the Pope is now arriving at Bear Park powwow grounds. His visit here, Tricia, does it give legitimacy, acknowledges what survivors have been trying to say and be listened to for so many decades?
For some, I think there's a role, especially for how the Church, the Catholic Church, changes its teachings, changes how it teaches about its entire history of centuries of not just in Canada, but working its influence and its not influence, but colonial control and genocides of Indigenous people everywhere, which has been taught in some regard, but I think this is a time for the Church especially, and for survivors families, but there's an opportunity here for Catholic, any Catholic people and people who are learning about becoming a priest or becoming a member of clergy, that this is an opportunity to really take a look at what that relationship between the Catholic Church and Indigenous people has been for centuries, has been genocidal, has been violent, but also there are a lot of Indigenous Catholic people that are also dedicated to working with the Church, and who the Church means a great deal to a lot of people as well. So mixed reactions, mixed feelings, and but this enormous history, this centuries of history that are represented here.
Okay. We are speaking with Tricia Logan, assistant professor at UBC, and now we are turning our attention to the Pope's arrival at the powwow grounds there, Bear Park, and those in attendance.
We'll have the holiness just get comfortable up there.
Walkers already. Come on.
Hai. Magagahkio kita tapskat na agahkio. Mswiteo tsega petagohte. Ano tsaota. Eta hedin tagohtet. Tapuek uksewat suin. Egao kihte aim hewino. Ekse nigano tahagwab stikoski. Ewi matue ho. Kikske tena no. Kia no tanses mamahtaw sa tegawa mstikoski. Ekse tan gamuagoge. Kon gamuino. Kahaw eksama. Kan gamunawa.
drums to go ski. Mia kwet tabago. Go Alta ina sino. Go petago te. Mga big space tabasak. Neto taba. Kutawi nok seban tok sewan sewet. Minita hale. Kanya hotataske hagana. Katawistan maksewat sewin. Hey. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, our drum song, the drum, and all our drums right across Turtle Island, it is a symbol of the heartbeat of Mother Earth. It's a symbol of the heartbeat of each and every one of us. We have a heartbeat. It represents the heartbeat of all animals and living things. So it is very powerful. It's healing. And again, it is a very special afternoon to be able to witness this and have this very sacred song introduce our visitor. So at this time, we're going to go into what we call a grand entry. We're going to be honoring our chiefs. They will be coming in from the east side will be our current chiefs, and to the south will be our former chiefs. So at this time, we're going to go into a grand entry song, what we call a grand entry song. Aha. Singers, Nigabuk. Ladies and gentlemen, our chiefs, every nation has an eagle staff. We have our eagle staffs leading our grand entry procession. The eagle staff represents our sovereignty. Our nations are represented by the eagle staffs. The history of our nations are represented with our eagle staffs. At this time, we're going to be coming in and calling in our great chiefs wearing the war bonnets. Our war bonnets are very sacred to us. War bonnets represent leadership of our nation, leadership amongst all our nations. The war bonnet, the eagle bonnet, represents who we are as a nation. So right here we got our Four Nations chiefs coming in at this time. Again, welcome to Maskwacis. We have our four chiefs, our Four Nations chiefs, and also our Grand Chief, Dr. Wilton Littlechild. So ladies and gentlemen, on this side, Sagastedok. Sagastedok is the east. The east represents the sun. The sun gives us light. The sun gives us health. The sun is one of the most powerful things the Creator has given us. As people, as First Nations people, we acknowledge the sun for healing and health. Hiya! So right now we have our former chiefs. We also have Represented here, we have all our chiefs within our territory, Treaty 6 territory, and also visiting chiefs from other First Nations in the war bonnets. Tapos mga kahigo, get nice kabek. Tapos higo, hego makisigaw. Tapos kakisiya, hego tahanma. Hanma mihtatamuin, mihtatamuin. Hego ma, hego tse, hego ma kapmise, kawi maispike. Tapos, tapos kasiya pingoek, hekta kiam, tapune tamik. Tapune tamak. Han makiano tansisun niga nimia. Hey tawase ao kiam. Han makipmatsuin no ay suniga nimia. Kitawasim sinawag. Mina kakio ko sinawag. Mina angge kape no gostik. Hey kota kiam tapmuhtin getsik. Han makigoy. Tagagito kagotsik. Hey! Hey! Penatamok matsuin! Penatamok! Hanma! Hey, tabisikagito kagwik! Hey, kata huyate wasuin! Piyama tsehuin! Hey, soniganimia! Kakiam! Hanma! Kainay siniwya! Kiam tapone taba! Kiam ego, mesos digaras kamga. Heo go kiam, hek takat staulena no. Hey, wetna kaya win. Treba tibag na ko ya kota ilok sebato. Hanmok sewat suen. Hey, 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 hey. Maybe at this time, ladies and gentlemen, let's give everybody a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. So, ladies and gentlemen, over here, we have our Ogimawak. We also have our eagle staffs. The eagle staffs represent our warriors. We had to defend our territories. Our warriors had to defend the language. Our warriors had to defend our children, our grandchildren. We had to defend our language. We had to defend our way of life. So these eagle staff represent that, and also the war bonnets, they represent leadership. So at this time, we're going to honor our eagle staffs and the war bonnets, our chiefs, with the flag song.
Actually, you know what? Forget this. Let's not get on the table. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. We'll go this way.
Hi, hi, hi. Thank you very much there, singers. I'm going to ask you to sing one more song. Okay, do you have the victory song there, singers? Sing us the victory song as we honor. You know, we've been here since time immemorial, and it's 2022, and we still have our way of life. We still have our languages, and we're going to continue on living our way of life. It's only going to get better. This is what we call our victory song here at this time. Aha, we'll have our eagle staffs, our chiefs. Aha, name it. Sagwek, Sagwek warriors, where's your war call? Once again, warriors, let's hear your war call in celebration. Sagawak! Sagawak! One more time! Sagawak! Hi, 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 hi. Okay, gentlemen, you can post the Eagle staffs there. We have areas that we're going to post our Eagle staffs, and we'll have all our chiefs come back here. Now, we're going to go into a healing dance here at this time, as soon as we have our Eagle staff situated right around the center pole here. You know, circle, it represents life from the beginning, and it never ends. We're going to continue that journey. So again, the center pole, we have one of our biggest ceremonies where we have what we call the king tree stands in the middle of our lodge, and all of our nation's people come there to show the Creator. And you know, they have to go through a 3-day, 4-day fast where they're going to dance without food and water. But this arbor you see, he represents that lodge. And again, gentlemen, you can make your way up to the front. And all the dignitaries, there is seating in front for you all. Astabik, hey, hey.
Matter. My mom matters.
Yep, yep. So, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a lot of survivors here, and this is a very historic event, and they wanted to be here. And we're asking everybody if you could just be seated, please, ladies and gentlemen, because people want to watch. I know we have the big screens out there, but we do really want to watch him as he makes his and what he's going to talk about here. Quick. Okay, quickly, everybody, you can clear the area.
Got a couple of gentlemen here, warriors, veterans. They're missing their chairs. Is somebody going to help them out? And everybody make a nice circle. We have people inside the circle. Kind of back up, back up. Everyone, back up.
You are watching our continuing coverage of Pope Francis's visit to Canada. At present, he is in Alberta at Maskwacis. They are in the Bear Park Powwow Grounds Center at this time, where we are awaiting for the Pope to speak. Everyone speculating that he will formally apologize for the church's role when it came to residential schools. We are waiting to see what he will say. A translator is also at the ready to be able to translate what he is saying. He has spent his day at the Ermineskin Cree First Nation Cemetery. He went by the Ermineskin Residential School. He spent several moments in prayer and being quiet at those locations. He's now here at the powwow grounds where we are looking at this ribbon. It's a procession of all the names of people at residential schools, and you could have maybe heard someone screaming that their mom was a survivor and that she mattered. As they organize the crowd to get ready for the proceedings to continue, we will of course continue to watch as well.
Hegogi time hewino an muksewat suin kiam tapune tama chik tapune tama chik ewan matapwe magam suiteo che tapwe ga petagote mstahe nanas komptinan tapwe maga kagiwe tama sunawa tagiwe tama sunawa mamos skiup mat suin ekta kiam ka kio tipahonigo kap mohtin geg eteo chiga pepa sigoeg Teo skotemiek binekta tahtoga penakataego kinakatagan wag kawigiwe tamaga wagan maya kigo emiasik uyot mamo taima semanto sewat suit. So ladies and gentlemen, at this time we're going to go to our sacred drum here with our singers. They're going to sing a special song again, and this is what we are going to be calling the healing dance. They'll sing the healing song, and we're going to have our dancers dance within this circle. And this will be all about healing. And the drum is a big part of the healing. It's the heartbeat of Mother Earth. The drum is life. Keep on walking, keep on walking, keep on walking there. Keep on walking. And security, if you want to kneel down up to the side so people can watch. You know, ladies and gentlemen, the number 4 represents the elements, the 4 directions, the 4 stages of life, the four living life forms. 4 directions. We have the sun rising from the east. And we also have From the south, we have the thunderbird. And over on the west side, we have the wind, the oxygen that we breathe. This is the government of Mother Earth. And on the north side, we have Mother Earth. Mother Earth is who we are. Mother Earth is all the plant life. Mother Earth, our mother, is also the mother of all insect life. Mother Earth is also the mother of all animals on the ground, in the water, in the air. Mother Earth, of course, is the mother of all humanity. Mother Earth is who she is. We are the children. We are the people of Mother Earth. Hi, hi. One more time, ladies and gentlemen, let's acknowledge our dancers. Hi, 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 hi. All right, there, dancers, you can find a place out there, and we're gonna go next in our program here.
Your Holiness, Fancy Wapikihu, White Eagle. It's a great honor to welcome you among us. You have traveled a long way to be with us on our land and to walk with us on the path of reconciliation. For this, we honor you and extend to you our most heartfelt welcome. We wish to acknowledge with deep appreciation and gratitude the great personal effort you have made to travel to our land. It is a blessing to receive and host you among us. The vast expanse of land called Kaganatak, Canada, and which the Indigenous peoples refer to as part of Turtle Island, is the traditional homeland for the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Here in Maskwacis, we are on Treaty 6 land, the ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux peoples since time immemorial. My name in Cree is Mahigant Moteo, Wolfwalker, Egwasaugiheo, Golden Eagle. In English, I am known as Wilton Littlechild. I was a student here at the Ermineskin Indian Residential School, which for your visit among us this day represents all the residential schools in our country. Gathered here this morning with the peoples of Maskwacis are residential school survivors, chiefs, leaders, elders, knowledge keepers, and youth from First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities across our land. We feel particularly honored to welcome as well the Governor-General of Canada, Her Excellency Mary Simon, and the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau. As a former commissioner As a former commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I have heard nearly 7,000 testimonies from former students of residential schools in this country. During the recent visit to your home at the Vatican by a delegation of Indigenous survivors, elders, knowledge keepers, and youth, you also heard of the abuses so many of us have suffered at this and other residential schools. During our time with you, it was clear to us all that you listened deeply and with great compassion to the testimonies that told of the way our languages were suppressed, our culture taken from us, and our spirituality denigrated. Our spirituality denigrated. You have heard the devastation that followed from the way our families were torn apart. The words you spoke to us in response clearly came from the depths of your heart and were, for those who heard them, a source of deep comfort and great encouragement. On that occasion, you expressed your intention to visit with us on our land, and in this way express your strong desire to be close to us. And now, Your Holiness, you have come to our land in response to our invitation, and as you promised. You have said that you have come as a pilgrim, seeking to walk together with us on the pathway of truth, justice, healing, reconciliation, and hope. We gladly welcome you to join us on this journey. As you acknowledged in your address to us in Rome, we Indigenous peoples strive always to consider the impact of the present events and deliberations on future generations. In that spirit, we sincerely hope that our encounter this morning and the words you share with us will echo the true healing and real hope throughout many generations to come. Kitatam hin, Your Holiness. Tawao, welcome to our land.
Señora Gobernadora General,
Madam Governor General, Mr. Prime Minister,
queridos pueblos indígenas,
dear Indigenous peoples of Maskwacis and of this land of Canada,
queridos hermanos,
dear brothers and sisters,
esperaba que llegara
I have been waiting to come here and be with you.
Desde aquí,
Here,
desde este lugar,
from this place associated with painful memories, I would like to begin what I consider a penitential pilgrimage. I have come to your native lands to tell you in person of my sorrow, to implore God's forgiveness, healing,
and
reconciliation, to express my closeness and to pray with you and for you.
Madam Governor General, Mr. Prime Minister, dear Indigenous peoples of Maskwacis and of this land of Canada, dear brothers and sisters, I have been waiting to come here and be with you. Here, from this place associated with painful memories, I would like to begin what I consider a pilgrimage, a penitential pilgrimage. I have come to your native lands to tell you in person of my sorrow, to implore God's forgiveness, healing, and reconciliation, to express my closeness, and to pray with you and for you.
Recuerdo los encuentros que tuvimos en Roma hace 4 meses.
I recall the meetings we had in Rome 4 months ago. At that time, I was given 2 pairs of moccasins as a sign of the suffering endured by Indigenous children, particularly those who unfortunately never came back from the residential schools. I was asked to return the moccasins when I came to Canada, and I will do so at the end of these few words, in which I would like to reflect on this symbol, which over the past few months has kept alive my sense of sorrow, indignation, and shame. The memory of those children is indeed painful. It urges us to work to ensure that every child is treated with love, honor, and respect. At the same time, those moccasins also speak to us of a path to follow, a journey that we desire to make together. We want to walk together, to pray together, and to work together, so that the sufferings of the past can lead to a future of justice, healing, and reconciliation.
I recall the meetings we had in Rome 4 months ago. At that time, I was given 2 pairs of moccasins as a sign of the suffering endured by Indigenous children, especially those who unfortunately never came back home from the residential schools. I was asked to return the moccasins when I came to Canada. I brought them, and I will do so at the end of these few words, in which I would like to reflect on this symbol, which over the past few months has kept alive my sense of sorrow, indignation, and shame. The memory of those children is indeed painful. It urges us to work to ensure that every child is treated with love, honor, and respect. At the same time, those moccasins also speak to us of a path to follow, a journey that we desire to make together. We want to walk together, to pray together, and to work together, so that the sufferings of the past can lead to a future of justice, healing, and reconciliation.
That is why the first part of my pilgrimage among you takes place in this region, which from time immemorial has seen the presence of Indigenous peoples. These are lands that speak to us. They enable us to remember. To remember, brothers and sisters, you have lived on these lands for thousands of years, following ways of life that respect the earth, which you received as a legacy from past generations and are keeping for those yet to come. You have treated it as a gift of the Creator to be shared with others and to be cherished in harmony with all that exists, in profound fellowship with all living beings. In this way, you learn to foster a sense of family and community, and to build solid bonds between generations, honoring your elders and caring for your little ones. A treasury of sound customs and teachings, centered on concern for others, truthfulness, courage, and respect, humility, honesty, and practical wisdom.
That is why the first part of my pilgrimage among you takes place in this region, which from time immemorial has seen the presence of indigenous peoples. These are lands that speak to us. They enable us to remember. To remember, brothers and sisters. You have lived on these lands for thousands of years, following ways of life that respect the earth, which you received as a legacy from past generations, and are keeping for those yet to come. You have treated it as a sign of the Creator, to be shared with others, and to be cherished in harmony with all that exists, in profound fellowship with all living beings. In this way, you learn to foster a sense of family and community, and to build solid bonds between generations, honoring your elders and caring for your little ones. A treasury of sound customs and teachings, centered on concern for others, truthfulness, courage and respect, humility, honesty, and practical wisdom.
Yet, if those were the first steps taken in these lands, the path of remembrance leads us, sadly, to those that followed. The place where we are gathered renews within me the deep sense of pain and remorse that I have felt in these past months. I think back on the tragic situations that so many of you, your families, and your communities have known, of what you shared with me about the suffering you endured in the residential schools. These are traumas that are in some way reawakened whenever the subject comes up. I realize too that our meeting today can bring back old memories and wounds, and that many of you may feel uncomfortable even as I speak. Yet it is right to remember, because forgetting leads to indifference. And as has been said, the opposite of love is not hatred, it is indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it is indifference. To remember the devastating experiences that took place in the residential schools hurts, angers, causes pain, and yet it is necessary.
Yet, if those were the first steps taken in these lands, the path of remembrance leads us, sadly, to those that followed. The place where we are gathered renews within me the deep sense of pain and remorse that I have felt in these past months. I think back on the tragic situations that so many of you, your families, and your communities have known, of what you shared with me about the suffering you endured in the residential schools. These are traumas that are in some way reawakened whenever the subject comes up. I realize too that our meeting today can bring back old memories and hurts, and that many of you may feel uncomfortable even as I speak. Yet, it is right to remember, because forgetfulness leads to indifference, And as has been said, the opposite of love is not hatred, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. To remember the devastating experiences that took place in the residential schools hurts, angers, causes pain, and yet it is necessary.
Es necesario recordar
It is necessary to remember how the policies of assimilation and enfranchisement, which also included the residential school system, were devastating for the people of these lands. When the European colonists first arrived here, there was a great opportunity to bring about a fruitful encounter between cultures, traditions, and forms of spirituality. Yet for the most part, that did not happen. Again, I think back on the stories you told me, how the policies of assimilation ended up systematically marginalizing the indigenous peoples. How also, through the system of residential schools, your languages and cultures were denigrated and suppressed. How children suffered physical, verbal, psychological, and spiritual abuse. How they were taken away from their homes at a young age, and how that indelibly affected relationships between parents and children, grandparents and grandchildren.
It is necessary to remember how the policies of assimilation and enfranchisement, which also included the residential school system, were devastating for the peoples of these lands. When the European colonists first arrived here, there was a great opportunity to bring about a fruitful encounter between cultures, traditions, and forms of spirituality. Yet, for the most part, that did not happen. Again, I think back on the stories you told, how the policies of assimilation ended up systematically marginalizing the indigenous peoples. How also, through the system of residential schools, your languages and cultures were denigrated and suppressed. How children suffered physical, verbal, psychological, and spiritual abuse. How they were taken away from their homes at a young age, and how that indelibly affected relationships between parents and children, grandparents and grandchildren.
I thank you for making me appreciate this, for telling me about the heavy burdens that you still bear, for sharing with me these bitter memories. Today, I am here in this land that, along with its ancient memories, preserves the scars of still open wounds. I am here because the first step of my penitential pilgrimage among you is that of again asking forgiveness, of telling you once more that I am deeply sorry. Sorry for the ways in which, regrettably, many Christians supported the colonizing mentality of the powers that oppressed the indigenous peoples. I am sorry. I ask forgiveness in particular for the ways in which many members of the church and of religious communities cooperated, not least through their indifference, in projects of cultural destruction and forced assimilation promoted by the governments of that time, which culminated in the system of residential schools.
I thank you for making me appreciate this, for telling me about the heavy burdens that you still bear, for sharing with me these bitter memories. Today, I am here in this land that, along with its ancient memories, preserves the scars of still open wounds. I am here because the first step of my penitential pilgrimage among you is that of again asking forgiveness, of telling you once more that I am deeply sorry. Sorry for the ways in which, regrettably, many Christians supported the colonizing mentality of the powers that oppress the indigenous peoples. I am sorry. I ask forgiveness. I ask forgiveness, in particular, for the ways in which many members of the church and of religious communities cooperated, not least through their indifference, in projects of cultural destruction and forced assimilation promoted by the governments of that time, which culminated in the system of residential schools.
Although Christian charity was not absent, and there were many outstanding instances of devotion and care for children, the overall effects of the policies linked to the residential schools were catastrophic. What our Christian faith tells us is that this was a disastrous error, incompatible with the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is painful to think of how the firm soil of values, language, and culture that made up the authentic identity of your peoples was eroded, and that you have continued to pay the price of this. In the face of this deplorable evil, the Church kneels before God and implores His forgiveness for the sins of her children. I myself wish to reaffirm this with shame and unambiguously. I humbly beg forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against the indigenous peoples.
Although Christian charity was not absent, and there were many outstanding instances of devotion and care for children, the overall effects of the policies linked to the residential schools were catastrophic. What our Christian faith tells us is that this was a disastrous error, incompatible with the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is painful to think of how the firm soil of values, language, and culture that made up the authentic identity of your peoples was eroded, and that you have continued to pay the price for this. In the face of this deplorable evil, the Church kneels before God and implores His forgiveness for the sins of her children. I myself wish to reaffirm this with shame and unambiguously. I humbly beg forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against the indigenous peoples.
Queridos hermanos y hermanas,
Dear brothers and sisters, Dear brothers and sisters, many of you and your representatives have stated that begging pardon is not the end of the matter. I fully agree. That is only the first step, the starting point. I also recognize that, looking to the past, no effort to beg pardon and to seek to repair the harm done will ever be sufficient, and that looking ahead to the future, no effort must be spared to create a culture able to prevent such situations from happening.
No solo no se repitan, sino que no encuentren espacios.
An important part of this process will be to conduct a serious investigation into the facts of what took place in the past and to assist the survivors of the residential schools to experience healing from the traumas they suffered.
Dear brothers and sisters, many of you and your representatives have stated that begging pardon is not the end of the matter. I fully agree. That is only the first step, the starting point. I also recognize that looking to the past, no effort to beg pardon and to seek to repair the harm done will ever be sufficient. And that looking ahead to the future, no effort must be spared to create a culture able to prevent such situations from happening. An important part of this process will be to conduct a serious investigation into the facts of what took place in the past and to assist the survivors of the residential schools to experience healing from the traumas they suffered.
I trust and pray that Christians and civil society in this land may grow in the ability to accept and respect the identity and the experience of the indigenous peoples. It is my hope that concrete ways can be found to make those peoples better known and esteemed, so that all may learn to walk together. For my part, I will continue to encourage the efforts of all Catholics to support the indigenous peoples. I have done so at various times and occasions, through meetings, appeals, and also through the writing of an apostolic exhortation. I realize that all this will require time and patience. We are speaking of processes that must penetrate hearts. My presence here and the commitment of the Canadian bishops are a testimony to our will to persevere on this path.
I trust and pray that Christians and civil society in this land may grow in the ability to accept and respect the identity and the experience of the indigenous peoples. It is my hope that concrete ways can be found to make those peoples better known and esteemed, so that all may learn to walk together. For my part, I will continue to encourage the efforts of all Catholics to support the indigenous peoples. I have done so at various times and occasions through meetings, appeals, and also through the writing of an apostolic exhortation. I realize that all this will require time and patience. We are speaking of processes that must penetrate hearts. My presence here and the commitment of the Canadian bishops are a testimony to our will to persevere on this path.
Queridos amigos,
Dear friends, this pilgrimage is taking place over several days and in places far distant from one another. Even so, it will not allow me to expect the many invitations I have received to visit centers like Kamloops, Winnipeg, and various places in Saskatchewan, Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. Nonetheless, please know that all of you are in my thoughts and in my prayer. Know that I am aware of the sufferings and traumas, the difficulties and challenges experienced by the indigenous peoples in every region of this country. The words that I speak throughout this penitential journey are meant for every Native community and person. I embrace all of you with affection.
Dear friends, this pilgrimage is taking place over several days and in places far distant from one another. Even so, it will not allow me to accept the many invitations I have received to visit centers like Kamloops, Winnipeg, and various places in Saskatchewan, Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. Nonetheless, please know that all of you are in my thoughts and in my prayer. Know that I am aware of the sufferings and traumas, the difficulties and challenges experienced by the Indigenous peoples in every region of this country. The words that I speak throughout this penitential journey are meant for every Native community and person. I embrace all of you with affection.
On this first step of my journey, I have wanted to make space for memory. Here, today, I am with you to recall the past, to grieve with you, to bow our heads together in silence, and to pray before the graves. Let us allow these moments of silence to help us interiorize our pain. Silence and prayer. In the face of evil, we pray to the Lord of goodness. In the face of death, we pray to the God of life. Our Lord Jesus Christ took a grave, which seemed the burial place of every hope and dream, leaving behind only sorrow, pain, and resignation, and made it a place of rebirth and resurrection, the beginning of a history of new life and universal reconciliation. Our own efforts are not enough to achieve healing and reconciliation. We need God's grace. We need the quiet and powerful wisdom of the Spirit, the tender love of the Comforter. May He bring to fulfillment the deepest expectations of our hearts. May He guide our steps and enable us to advance together on our journey.
On this first step of my journey, I have wanted to make space for memory. Here today, I am with you to recall the past, to grieve with you, to bow our heads together in silence, and to pray before the graves. Let us allow these moments of silence to help us interiorize our pain, silence, and prayer. In the face of evil, we pray to the Lord of goodness. In the face of death, we pray to the God of life. Our Lord Jesus Christ took a grave which seemed the burial place of every hope and dream, leaving behind only sorrow, pain, and resignation, and made it a place of rebirth and resurrection, the beginning of a history of new life and universal reconciliation. Our own efforts are not enough to achieve healing and reconciliation. We need God's grace. We need the quiet and powerful wisdom of the Spirit, the tender love of the Comforter. May He bring to fulfillment the deepest expectations of our hearts. May He guide our steps, take us by the hand, and enable us to advance together on our journey.
At the same time, honoring the person that stood up and was able to come and not only say I'm sorry, but went one step further and provided some form of, asking for forgiveness, but at the same time, moving forward and doing things for those people, the succeeding generations of those people. So it's with that we sing this song again for those children and for our great leader and Pope.
Kita sana makan kikoi kita mikni nan kita ke Maskwacis saga kanita te pele besok utau ka maske muda kuta ki pizza ga tu da suni ka ki tu da sun kina usuna wa ki tu ke bawa weska da swista basu ikosa hai
Repudiate the doctrine of discovery! Renounce the people move and genocide! That's what we need!
We are continuing our live coverage of Pope Francis's visit in Canada. He is now meeting with elders. As you can see, gifts are being exchanged. A lot of emotion in the crowd as they listen to the Pope's apology to what happened in residential schools and the history associated with it in Canada, across the nation. He also gave a little bit of an explanation as to how he had received all of the invitations from the different First Nations and Indigenous people to come to their territories. He wasn't able to, but that he is with them in thought and in prayers. Again, a very emotional day for so many people there. Some people happy, seemingly, with what has been said, others not so much. Also in attendance, several chiefs from across the country. From BC, we did see Cook P, Roseanne Casimir from Tecumloops to Shwekmek, her First Nation, of course, the one that really gave a voice to Every Child Matters with the discovery of those, what some people are saying, the impressions that they had seen there. So it's just a very emotional day. To sort of break down exactly how this is affecting people, let's bring in Tricia Logan. We've been speaking with her this morning, assistant professor at the University of British Columbia. Thank you again for being here, Tricia. How are you doing after listening to the apology and seeing people's reaction? A lot of tears in the crowd, actually.
I can feel that. It's seeing all the survivors in the crowd and hearing from all the survivors' responses, all the very mixed responses in the moment, and then knowing that there's still days and months to come to really to listen again to the words of the apology, to listen again to what was expressed, to listen to reactions. So there's a journey ahead for a lot of survivors, and very emotional, and for some, and very historic. And it's time to really let all those words and all those feelings kind of really sink in, and giving people time, giving people space, giving people time for prayer and for ceremony and for healing under their own terms.
We'd heard from someone that was there after the Pope had spoken, and he was helping in the gesture of reception and accepting and listening to what the Pope had said, and he, had said thank you for the apology, and he seemed happy that there would be moving forward with this. Do you think that was enough?
I'm sure there'll be lots of different reactions in the coming days, in today or in coming days, on it, whether it was enough for people to hear, or if people connected with the words that the Pope was sharing. It was, in many ways, it was very detailed. It was very detailed, and it went back to centuries of histories of Catholicism, histories of Christianity, and acknowledging that very long history of colonialism. I think it was for asking for forgiveness in this face of what was he described as deplorable evil, and the policies of the residential schools being catastrophic, and then of course turning to the future, turning to ask and to speak a lot about forgiveness from the church, but also to civil society, to all Christians, to create and reflect on new relationships and how they walk. Again, the term walking together came up several times.
And Trish, I'm just going to interrupt you here. Sorry, the Pope is just saying something else.
Christ, our Lord, and say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. The kingdom come, with the will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, and we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. The Lord be with you. Blessed by the name of the Lord. Our help is in the name of the Lord. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Okay. We need to clear people so that they can dance. Yeah.
Pope Francis saying the Our Father there. And getting ready to return to his chair. We're expecting to hear the Our Father also in Cree. I'm not sure if that will still take place. Again, a very emotional day here in Canada and in Alberta, in Maskwacis, where he's at right now, expressing an apology and a way forward to walk with and work with Indigenous peoples.
Ano skagi sagag minan bahwes kanim na minatahtogi sagagi kai sagasi namawaya ke kagi mai to tagoya ke exwis kasi namaunan kagi pe mai to tama siskem na chigatmat smam tani tama igatin namaunan kama ta treksi. Amen.
And at Bear Park Powwow in Maskwacis, they're just starting to file out now to continue the Pope's program in Alberta. Let's bring Tricia Logan back, assistant professor at the University of British Columbia. Sorry, I had to cut you off there a little earlier to listen to what the Pope was saying. He, of course, taking in prayer with an Our Father. Now, again, a very emotional day. Seemingly people, they're accepting what the Pope had said, some though not so much. We did hear someone saying, I believe, quote, repudiate the doctrine of discovery. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yes, I think that was a big expectation for a lot of people, for the Pope to mention or address or repudiate the doctrine of discovery. That was also included in the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, was specific mention about the doctrine of discovery. And it's from the 1400s. Part of that doctrine allowed Christians, Catholics, Protestants, this kind of sacred right to remove, to take land, to take resources, to claim land on behalf of the crown or on behalf of the church, if there were no Christians there. It kind of created this ancient dichotomy of savage and civilized peoples, and this ancient dichotomy between Christianity, Catholicism, and Indigenous peoples, or any other religions that were considered heathen or pagan, and so a lot of colonialism, a lot of assimilation, and a lot of the claim of Indigenous peoples' lands came under this doctrine, and it continues today. There are a lot of modern legal land rights cases that cite a lot of those papal bulls in the doctrine, and how pervasive and how continuous those teachings of the Catholic Church, of Protestant churches, carries on today. And so that there were a lot of expectations that the Pope would mention that, or mention it at all. So I guess we'll wait to see what this ongoing journey and what the next few days will hold.
Also in attendance today, Premier Jason Kenney and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Do you think they were taking notes and thinking about how to continue to walk forward with Indigenous people?
There's hope for that. I think there's a lot of hope, because that's when we think of in the Pope's words about colonialism and about the residential schools being part of a system, there is that ongoing acknowledgement that this was not only the church, but it was also government of Canada, Dominion of Canada, of colonial governments that perpetuated the harms of residential school, the legacies of kind of all interconnected systems of colonialism, like the residential schools, day schools, Indian hospitals, child welfare system. All of those structures were tied between the churches and the government. So one would hope, I think there is a lot of hope, that Prime Minister and the premiers take a portion of that, those apologies of the words that, and kind of this call that the Pope has created to Christians and to civil society. He addressed all of civil society to re-examine their relationships with Indigenous communities and with survivors.
Yeah, hopefully this really gets people thinking and change to come. The Pope mentioned the other communities that had invited him, BC, of course, and Kamloops, the Tecumseh, Secwepemc, First Nations in Saskatchewan, those in Winnipeg, in the Yukon, etc. How important was it that he addressed that? Because there was a lot of controversy and hurt from First Nations. Certainly, we're located here in British Columbia, and the Tecumseh Secwepemc were very vocal about how they really wanted the Pope to come visit them here, especially with the discovery that kind of really set this off and brought everything to a head and brought and focused attention.
That's true. It's a very difficult, and it became very controversial, of course, for good reason. And there was a lot you could see through the crowd during the grand entry. You can see the red cloth that carried the names of the children some of the names of the children who died at residential school, part of the memorial register from the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. So you can see through the grand entry and through the event today, carrying on and assuring that those through Kamloops, through all of the investigations going on to the sites of unmarked burials and mass graves across Canada, was mentioned today and was part of the day. And of course, acknowledging as well that there were not, there's a limited number of places that the Pope is able to visit or that was planned to visit. And the Catholic Church, the Catholic Bishops of Canada, and how they plan those stops, I'm sure took a lot of very serious discussions and met a lot of serious questioning. Mm-hmm. But efforts were made to bring survivors from across Canada. Some were able to make it, some weren't able to make it. It did cause a lot of trouble for survivors to make it to any of these locations, and that they weren't able to visit if they did want to. And tells a bigger story of just how wide and how far residential schools were, that touched every part of Canada and First Nations and Métis Inuit communities across Canada. It speaks to a much bigger impact that residential schools have, that there were so many places that there was such serious significance for the Pope to draw his attention to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the ceremony that we saw today, in particular from the Indigenous First Nation, the Maskwacis, how they presented themselves with the grand entry. It was very beautiful, very colorful. And then with the gift of the headdress to the Pope. How significant is that? Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of those headdresses?
There was a big welcome. It's I think there's a connection to gift giving and to acknowledgement, and especially for sacred items, to acknowledge the sacredness of the headdress and of eagle feathers and of the people who created the ceremonial, all parts of the ceremony, and that all of it was connected to the prayers that were offered at the start, the songs, the grand entry, all of the leaders and all the survivors that came. It all becomes part of a whole, are the gifts, and as part of it, the headdress, to also acknowledge the prayers that the community has offered, the nations have offered, the leaders have offered, the elders have presented to the Pope as he has presented to them prayer and his spirituality. There's a way to honor in great ways how First Nations can welcome and pray in the same space, and create that very sacred ceremonial time in First Nations territory, on territory where there was a large residential school where they've welcomed survivors, and to assure that the whole process and the whole event and the whole apology is surrounded with ceremony and with prayer and with time for a lot of sacred reflection.
And we actually have a clip from the Pope's apology. Let's take a listen to it if possible.
Although Christian charity was not absent, and there were many outstanding instances of devotion and care for children, the overall effects of the policies linked to the residential schools were catastrophic. What our Christian faith tells us is that this was a disastrous error, incompatible with the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is painful to think of how the firm soil of values, language, and culture that made up the authentic identity of your peoples was eroded, and that you have continued to pay the price of this. In the face of this deplorable evil, the Church kneels before God and implores His forgiveness for the sins of her children. I myself wish to reaffirm this with shame and unambiguously. I humbly beg forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against the Indigenous peoples. Dear brothers and sisters, many of you and your representatives have stated that begging pardon is not the end of the matter. I fully agree. That is only the first step, the starting point. I also recognize that, looking to the past, no effort to beg pardon and to seek to repair the harm done will ever be sufficient, and that looking ahead to the future, no effort must be spared to create a culture able to prevent such situations from happening. An important part of this process will be to conduct a serious investigation into the facts of what took place in the past and to assist the survivors of the residential schools to experience healing from the traumas they suffered.
And that, of course, Pope Francis making his apology to Indigenous people in regards to what happened at residential schools and for all of the traumas that they've suffered. Let's bring in Tricia Logan once again, assistant professor at UBC, the University of British Columbia. And while hearing that apology one more time, of course, you heard it when it first came out. What does that, I guess, what kind of emotions does that bring up for you?
It's a lot. I can first think of survivors. That's my first thoughts, and just how light some may feel by having that as the Pope begs for forgiveness and offers apology, this weight that is lifted, but it also at the same time is a weight on, and it's as much as it lightens for people, it also is very heavy for others, and resurfaces trauma and resurfaces a lot of very serious, like all of what the Pope is speaking about, the evils of Christians against Indigenous peoples, and this disastrous error, incompatible with the gospel, those errors, that evil that was talked about, all of that comes up again for people. But I think throughout the ceremony, throughout the event, there were all sorts of messages and signs and expressions of resistance, of resilience, of activism, of Indigenous, of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit survivors and leaders and youth and Indigenous youth who were part of the day, demonstrating how much strength there is, and how much, balancing those messages of trauma and balancing those messages of forgiveness and of sadness and of sorrow, and balancing that out with so much optimism or strength, or again, advocacy, of activism, of hope, and of strength in that same space. All of those same messages coming through in the same event.
The Pope had mentioned, obviously, not just the apology and begging for forgiveness, as he said, but he also mentioned having an investigation to be conducted and to assist survivors of residential schools. What do you think he means by that? How do you even get around to starting that?
It's carrying on with work that started, again, decades ago, work that started with survivors coming forward from the first times that survivors left the schools. Over 100 years ago, children were coming home to tell their parents what was happening to them, that of physical and sexual abuse, of students dying of disease, of malnutrition, of mistreatment. And parents were reporting that to RCMP, to the local churches. Local churches were reporting that back to higher authorities at the time in Catholic churches and Protestant churches. And so it's not that there wasn't a record, and it's not that there wasn't evidence, but of course it took decades, several decades, until the 1980s, and especially the mid-1990s and early 2000s, where I think the public and this momentum of listening to survivors really gathered, as I said, gathering strength and gathering voices, where survivors had always known what had happened, but now there was dedicated public and church and government attention to listening to survivors, to listening to truths, and then culminating in the settlement agreement and in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and growing in listening to how truths have shaped Canada, have shaped this relationship. So I think that the Pope's messages of conducting an investigation obviously started a long time ago, but I think part of that should, or perhaps address, the call for additional records and additional information that the Catholic Church has held and continues to hold and has not yet handed over, either in Canada or at the Vatican, and contributing funds, contributing resources to the investigations going on today at sites of unmarked burials and sites of former residential schools, and for providing healing support and support to survivors to find their family members, to find their ancestors, to find their own information that is still, in some cases, very hard to find.
All right. Thank you so much, Tricia. That's Tricia Logan from University of British Columbia. And we're just going to take a quick break here, and we will return with our ongoing coverage of Pope Francis's visit to Canada. Stay with us. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Pope Francis in Canada. He is currently at Maskwacis in Alberta, where he has formally apologized on that territory to Indigenous people in Canada over what happened at residential schools and all the horrors that were suffered. And of course, even going back as far as how Christianity was not listening to what the people needed and what they were saying. We're just looking at pictures of earlier in the day when the Pope went to the Ermineskin Cree First Nations cemetery. He visited that, as well as the Ermineskin Residential School, which was one of the largest residential schools in Canada. It has since been turned over many decades ago. But what happened there, the pain, the trauma, that has not ended for many of the survivors and family members who continue to deal with this. So today's apology, very meaningful for some, but not for all. Some not really wanting to see the Pope here in Canada. To talk a little bit more about this, Tricia Logan, assistant professor with the University of British Columbia. Thanks again for spending your time with us today. Can we talk a little bit about that, about the people who just didn't care or didn't even want to see the Pope come to Canada? They want action. They don't just want words, some of them saying.
That's very true. Especially survivors, especially for survivors who spent their childhood, spent their lives facing what the treatment of the Catholic Church, do not want to spend any more of their energy or their time or their heart attached to talking about the Pope or thinking about the Pope. There really is a big effort to avoid thinking about an apology, and that for a lot of people, apology is meaningless. For a lot of people, apology is really just words. And it's words from a church that committed such serious, egregious, as the Pope said, disastrous and catastrophic legacy here. And for a lot of people, even people who aren't survivors, for youth and for other generations, for people whose families attended residential school, the meaning that the apology carries or doesn't carry really is something that they don't want to listen to. People do really want action. People do want, I think that's a lot of people's responses, is that until things start to change, until things start to move ahead or to move at all, I don't think some people will have any interest in it, that they really want concrete, sustainable, long-term change, transformative change.
I'm interested in getting your take on this, if you're able to comment on it. Many people remain Catholic that attended those residential schools. For them, why do you think they've chosen to continue believing in the religion and following it? And for them today, listening to this apology, how do they balance this all? It must be very difficult.
It is. There's a significant, there are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people that are devout Catholics and Christians, and that attend church regularly, that pray as Catholic people in their prayers. For many who are survivors, they attended residential schools their lives, and that's the only way they ever learned how to pray. That's the only connection to prayer and spirituality that they were raised with. Being forcibly separated from your family for generations, that was the only source of prayer and of attending church. And so many continue to attend church. Many went on to join the church or become a member of clergy, become sisters or brothers as part of the church. And I think the church has responded in different ways to understand how Indigenous First Nations or Métis or Inuit spirituality has shared some of those teachings. There's so many shared teachings that people speak about. So I know that that's a source of comfort and a source of healing for many, especially survivors who did experience trauma, who did experience abuse and loss and neglect, and their family members passed away. They seek healing and prayer through the church. And so acknowledge that it is a complicated relationship, but still remain very dedicated to the Catholic Church.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for your analysis and expertise. That is Tricia Logan. Let's bring in our other guest, Crystal Gale Fraser. Her research has focused on the history of student experiences at residential schools in the Northwest Territories. She's also a professor in the Faculty of Native Studies at the U of A, University of Alberta. Thank you so much for being here. Crystal, you listened to the Pope's apology. What did you take away from it?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. I think that the ceremony and event at Maskwacis was very well done. We were able to see a lot of the beautiful Cree culture and language and ceremony. From the Pope's speech and an actual apology, I think some of the language that was used was very noteworthy. And apologies if your earlier guest has already covered this. I just have a few points to make. And first and foremost, it seems that the Pope has apologized for the Christians who were supporting colonizing powers and the members of the Christian church who cooperated with the government. So again, from my perspective, I think this apology is falling short, that there is not the recognition that the greater Catholic Church really had a key part. They were a key architect in the construction, establishment, operation of Indian residential schools and the execution of this genocidal program in Canada. And then additionally, which is a little curious considering the Pope's visit to the graveyard in Maskwacis prior to his apology, there was no mention of the unmarked graves or the thousands of Indigenous children who died while institutionalized or a result of their time at Indian residential schools. And then finally, I think it was a little bit of a surprise that there was an investigation forthcoming announced by the Pope. And so for sure, over the past, many months, Indigenous communities, survivors of Indian residential schools have been calling for not just a shallow or hollow apology for just words, that an action plan needs to be included here. We do see the action of an investigation, but we know what there is to know about residential schooling and the Catholic Church. We have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. 2015, they published their results. We have the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People, 1996. We have the narratives and the testimonies and the stories of survivors of Indian residential schools. And so while definitely more specific research about these institutions are needed, I'm not necessarily sure that another large-scale investigation of the Roman Catholic Church's involvement in Indian residential schools is something that would really advance truth and reconciliation in a concrete way.
The Pope also spoke about assisting survivors of residential schools. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, it'll be very interesting to see the clarification on that. That is definitely something that I noted. And I mean, one of the calls of action that have been made is this outstanding payment of $30 million that the Catholic Church in Canada continues to owe survivors. And that was a fundraising obligation that fell very short. And so I would say first and foremost that the Catholic Church needs to make good on that promise, that they need to compensate survivors of Indian residential schools. But really also, is this support going to come from the Pope and from Vatican City, or is this going to come from Canadian bishops, missions, and organizations?
Thank you so much for your time. That is Crystal Gale Fraser, University of Alberta. Thank you so much. If you have any struggles and you need some help, there is a number you can call in confidence, 1-800-721-0066. It is for survivors. Thank you for watching. Stay with us.